On Press Perspective today, we delve into South Korea's defense market and the latest deal that the country has sealed. Do stay with us. Hope your work week is off to a good start. It's Monday, December 15th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. South Korea recently inked a preliminary agreement with Peru for the sale of its military land vehicles. For more on this defense market development, I have Steven Borowiec with Japanese weekly news magazine Nikkei Asia here in the studio. Steven, welcome back.
Thank you.
I also have Professor Kim Jun-mo at Konkuk University joining this session virtually. Professor Kim, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
My pleasure.
Right, we shall start here in the studio. Steven, let's begin with details about this preliminary deal for the sale of South Korea's military land vehicles to Peru.
So it's a total of 195 units, and among those are 54 K2 tanks and 141 wheeled armor vehicles. I would say the significance of this is that it represents South Korean defense makers. I believe it's Hyundai Rotem and STX that are involved in this, reaching out to and scoring a deal in a new part of the world. So in recent years, since the start of the Russian war in Ukraine, there's been a lot of inroads by the K defense sector in striking deals with Poland and with other countries in Eastern Europe who are looking to, the countries that are kind of in Russia's orbit, that are looking to buttress their own defenses, that are looking to quickly boost their military capabilities to ward off any kind of regional uncertainty. But as far as I know, this is the first kind of major deal that's been announced between South Korea and a country in Latin America. And according to reports, if this deal is officially sealed, it would mark the beginning, the first ever, the biggest ever deal between South Korean defense makers and a country in that part of the world. So it represents a continued evolution of the K defense sector.
Right, and I understand this particular deal, Steven, includes two key parts. Could you walk us through them?
Yeah, it's two parts of a kind of bigger process, and the timeline that we're dealing with is next year to the year 2040. And just for people who are watching, to me, the kind of interesting takeaway is that it's a long process of preparing for local production. So this is something that I think is kind of new to Korean defense makers. They tend to make a lot of their own stuff in-house, but I think in my understanding is that in recent years, as their business has increased, they have had to enter into a new kind of arrangement where they are preparing local companies to be able to produce this stuff for themselves. And so in this particular case, phase one goes from next year until 2028. And this involves the delivery of vehicles and the kind of training by the South Korean firms of local staff to be able to maintain and repair these things on their own. And then the second phase of the agreement goes from 2029 to 2040. And that's when the idea is that in Peru, they will be able to produce all of these things on their own. And so I think it's significant in that it's a kind of an encapsulation of how the K defense sector is evolving. I believe K companies have entered into similar agreements in Romania and other countries. But as I said before, this is a kind of illustration of how these K defense companies are looking to expand and looking to keep things going as the global security landscape evolves.
Right then, speaking within your capacity as a scholar, Professor Kim, what more can you tell us about the significance of this latest deal with Peru for South Korea?
Yes, this is the second largest sales of K2 tanks after our Poland case. And after Poland, we can call it as another home run, which will bring in a series of K2 tank sales in South America, the Middle East, and possibly in Europe. For example, K9 has been the world's best seller Hoicher by taking about 60% of international market. K2 tank has been a dark horse so far, but with the sales, we can claim that K2 tank is one of the three major main battle tanks in the international market. So that's one significance. Second significance would be this is a successful arms export case packaged with industrial cooperation.
Professor Kim, for the sake of our general audience then, could you walk us through the K-defense market? I mean, how big is it and who are the movers and shakers, if you will, and what makes South Korea a productive partner with regard to arms for its global counterparts?
Yes. Korea takes the 10th largest arms exporting country according to the Stockholm Peace Research Report. And we are aiming at becoming fourth largest arms exporting country by year 2030. We have various size defense contractors, and I can name 4 or 5 major ones. For example, Hana Aerospace has wider scope of products ranging from K9 howitzers, Redback armored infantry vehicles, Cheongung air defense missile systems, and Cheonmu multiple rocket systems. LIG Next One is a very specialized company producing missile systems, including Cheongung air defense missiles and Raybolt anti-tank missiles and others. And we have Hyundai Rotem, producer of K2 tanks and K808 wheeled armored personnel carrier to be exported to Peru. And in the civilian sector, Hyundai Rotem is a producer of high-speed train. And we have Kai, system integrator of KF-21 and FA-50 fighter jets. Both have great potential for export markets. And we have Hana Ocean and Hyundai Heavy Industries, both are mega-sized shipbuilders that can build surface combatants and submarines with different displacement. And what makes Korean companies appealing in the international market? First, price and quality both met in the international market. Second, our Korean defense products have compatibility with existing Western products and ammunitions. Third, fast delivery, industrial cooperation, and wide range of products. And in addition to all this, Korean government is trying to make a strategic export fund in addition to augment export-import bank financing mechanism. And this fund is aimed at defense product export and nuclear power plant export potentially. So these are the factors.
Right, good to know, Professor. And Steven, with regard to Peru's decision to strike a deal with South Korea, what can you tell us about Peru's reasons for wanting to modernize its military?
Well, I'm certainly not an expert on the history of the Peruvian military or of the particular security threats faced by Peru, but from what I've read, it just seemed like the Peruvian military had been dealing with some aging equipment and kind of aging facilities, and there was just a need to bring in some new and more adept equipment. And South Korea, for the reasons that Professor just laid out, South Korea was an apt partner due to things like compatibility, value for money, and speed of delivery. So I also just would think that just from what I know about Peru and kind of Latin America more generally, this is a region of the world with complicated topography, where there's a history of land combat, of armed guerrilla groups, of insurgencies. I know in Peru in particular, there's the Shining Path, and there's some other history of kind of renegade conflict between organized forces and less organized groups in kind of a challenging landscape. So I think that's probably a factor. And moving forward, I would also just say that, you know, I've also read about Peru kind of more branching out kind of more generally and seeking a wider range of partners. This is an area of the part of the world that like the U.S. has typically dominated, especially from a defense perspective. Peru will host the APEC meeting. I believe it's in the coming years. And so they have a kind of innate need to bolster their security in advance of that. But it seems to me like it's the kind of market that the South Korean firms would target as having pressing security needs and being kind of, at least in terms of its defense cooperation, kind of open to new partnerships, not like specifically locked into a traditional alliance or a traditional commercial structure with any one partner. So it seems like it has the potential for a win-win arrangement.
Right, and beyond Peru, Professor Kim, quite a number of pundits say military modernization appears to be a national initiative for quite a number of countries. What do you suppose is driving this campaign, if you will?
Yes, after World War II, although we had series of wars, but in general, we have been enjoying globalization and the expansion of trade. And under the expansion of globalization lied an assumption of non-zero-sum game, meaning ever-increasing mutual benefits coming from economic development and expansion of trade volumes. But since 1990s on, we are observing the symptoms of the end of globalization era, the evidence of which include conflicts based on religion, resource, slow economic growth, domestic conflict, ethnicity, protectionism, more recently, isolationism of foreign policy. All this will drive individual countries to recalculate the cost of rearmament. And this was reassured by the recent Russia-Ukraine war. And countries find that even superpower countries cannot find easy way to resolve those conflicts. So for them, it's a way to go into their own armament. And the assumption is that the assumption is changed into zero-sum game, where if I win, you lose, and we don't share. That's the new norm. And if somebody asks if this could be escalated to a wider scope war, a bigger scale, it's too early to tell, but necessary conditions for wider conflict are being accumulated right now.
Right, which is why quite a number of countries are choosing to modernize their military, it appears. Stephen, in the meantime, the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute recently published a paper, that is, about South Korea's defense market and its related risks. Could you share them with us?
I think what the paper was trying to highlight is that in South Korean defense sector, there is a very close, very cooperative relationship between the private sector and the public sector, the government. I mean, when I've written about this, I always found it a little bit confusing when sometimes you have to say that South Korea has achieved this, South Korea has gotten this deal, and then you have to explain that these are actually private South Korean companies. I mean, this is not, so it's kind of this hybrid model. And I'd say that presents certain advantages just because there is the backing of the state, there is funding for research and development. South Korea can leverage its diplomatic networks in pursuit of these deals so that when these companies go abroad, they're not just relying on their personal commercial networks. They have the support of the embassy in that country. They can get in the room with the right people who make these kinds of decisions. And that's all well and good, but I just say that there are some kind of inherent drawbacks to that model. When we're talking about business, when we're talking about a field that is reliant upon innovation and upon finding new and advantageous ways of doing things, a kind of state-led model can make that a little bit more difficult because in order to get the kind of backing, you need to get approval from the government, and that might kind of discourage companies from taking risks. That might discourage companies from doing things that differ from the way that the South Korean military has customarily worked. So I think if you're a South Korean defense manufacturer, really what you want to be doing for commercial reasons is developing something that can be directly applied to the South Korean military, which is quite big, and you want to have access to these kinds of big contracts. You want to be in the room and have that kind of mainstream support. So what that kind of does, I think, sometimes is it locks companies into a certain kind of customary or traditional way of doing things. That's contained in the report, the Stockholm Center report that you mentioned. I would just say that viewing this from the perspective of a journalist, something that you have to kind of mention is the arms industry is not something that you can talk about in quite the same way as you can a lot of other exports-oriented industries because it's a very lumpy kind of thing commercially. It's like, if you look at this deal we're talking about with Peru, like this is a deal that is going over until 2040. It's a very long-term kind of thing. So depending on what happens in the geopolitical landscape, you may have arms producers who have 1 year where they sign a bunch of very big deals and they have a very exciting kind of result. And then for the following years, they are fulfilling those, they're working behind the scenes to fulfill those, but they're not announcing anything that's new. So from an outside perspective, it can seem as though the industry goes through these kinds of very drastic kind of peaks and valleys. So I would say that that's just an inherent limitation of the industry itself, and it's just something that we need to keep in mind when we talk about it and when we gauge the the success or the failure of the momentum. Just because if it so happens that over the next few years there are not more landmark deals announced, that doesn't mean that the industry is not going ahead in an advantageous way. It's just the kind of natural momentum of the arms sector.
Right, sure. For sure, something to think about, of course. Professor Kim, this particular paper published by the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute also claims that technology transfer and localized production setups, which is something that Steven mentioned earlier with reference to the deal between South Korea and Peru, that these setups may ultimately serve to secure South Korea contracts for now, but that they risk turning South Korea's buyers into South Korea's competitors in the future. What are your thoughts, and what do you recommend to keep K-Defense competitive?
Indeed, Korea has been more generous in technology transfer and local industrialization packages than any other arms exporting competitors so far. And it is quite awakening that Stockholm report mentioned that. And basically, it's a double-edged issue. So I will mention both sides. The threat side goes in two ways. First, intellectual property right. That is, it takes long time and effort, budget, man hours to make a defense product. And if certain deals or one single deal will jeopardize the technological basis, then Korean defense industry should reconsider that deal in many ways. Second, Korean defense industries, like others, are not always selling cutting-edge products. They may be adjusting their level into low and medium level products customized for their customers. This segment of products will be direct hit by the technology deal because we are teaching all those things, and they are producing this low-end, medium-level segment products. So in some sense, for Korean defense industry's point of view, technology transfer may be bound within some limits in the future. That's one side. The other side is, while K2 tank is making progress, as we mentioned a few minutes ago, Korean industry is preparing next generation main battle tank titled as K3 already. So we are in some sense preparing for that as well. So that's one optimistic side. Also, we have successful track record for doing local cooperation successfully, like in the Australian Redback armored personnel carrier case. So basically, it's a double-edged issue. It's a competition of how fast different players can adapt.
Right, and quite a bit of a balancing act, if you will. Steven, moving forward, sure, but staying with security, what's the latest with regard to South Korea's ambitions for nuclear-powered submarines?
As far as I know, a bunch of the details of the where, the when, and the who still need to be worked out. I mean, there was a real tone of celebration in Gyeongju when President Lee sought and received permission from President Trump to build these, but as best as I know, they haven't quite broken down the exact, they will be produced in this shipyard at this timeline. I mean, I don't think those, I'm in the President Lee's foreign media group chat, and as far as I know, he hasn't come out and said any of that. I mean, I do think in the ether there was a kind of disagreement whereby Trump said on social media that these would be produced in the U.S., but the conventional wisdom was that South Korean officials would prefer to produce them in South Korea because this country has some better equipped and some more advanced shipyards here with the kind of know-how and the kind of human resources in place that is required to undertake a project of that magnitude. And just in the ensuing days and weeks, there has been, I think, some discussion as to whether or not the decision to develop nuclear-powered submarines kind of tests South Korea's commitment to nuclear non-proliferation. President Lee has been, I think, quite careful in his messaging, and he's said that the commitments to non-proliferation does allow for the use of certain forms of nuclear energy, and South Korea still has no plans to acquire nuclear weapons. And so I think just for the time being, until some of these more practical details get ironed out, President Lee and the South Korean administration will continue to face these types of questions as to what this all means. But hopefully we'll get some clarity on those points soon.
Right, hopefully. And in the meantime, Professor Kim, this is an impromptu question for you, but speaking again within your capacity as a scholar, were you surprised by the approval given by the Trump administration with regard to South Korea's pursuit of nuclear-powered submarines?
Yes, it was like the, if I make a metaphor, it's like Gordian's knot, solving the unsolved homework at once. But there is one common element between commercial side and what Korea is pursuing as the nuclear powered submarine. That is, we are using very low enrichment level fuel, because in the future, many countries will need something called small modular reactor for electricity needed for AI and data center and all other civilization needs. And this submarine is using also that low-grade enrichment level fuel, and also at the same time fulfilling defense needs of the country, also contributing to the power balance, safety of East Asia. So I was quite thinking it's an optimistic and very promising project, and I was surprised at first.
As were quite a number of pundits here in the country. All right, on that note, we'll end today's talk. Professor Kim, thank you so much for your insights today.
I really enjoyed.
Right. And here in the studio, Steven, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Right. On that note, we say goodbye. As always, thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow.